Colleagues, I'm doing a sound check here. Is the sound all right?
Yeah.
Colleagues, friends, welcome to the first session of the conference, which is on the topic of nationalism and globalism in contemporary literatures of Cyprus, Greece and Turkey. There is a convention, a conference convention, of which I was until recently unaware, namely that the person sitting in my chair is known as a speaker. I had a great shock when I saw the program. However, I am happy to know, and you should be happy to know, that I am not, in any substantive sense, a speaker. The real speakers are to my right and left. My task is to chair and to make some introductory remarks. Introductory remarks which are perforce limited, since my ignorance of much of what is to be discussed today is unmeasurable. However, I shouldn't simply leave it at that, speaking as I do, we're gathered here, in the old capital of a very large empire, with significant interests in the Eastern Mediterranean. About 60 years ago, a British Prime Minister, in the middle of a diplomatic crisis, delivered a formulation which deservedly lives in infamy. He referred to obscure quarrels in a faraway place among peoples about whom we know very little. Now, his remark was descriptively accurate, and it indicated a mindset which, unfortunately, was all too common and remains all too common. I prefer to recall another statement, also made in this island sometime earlier, and take it as a motto for the involvement of people like myself and my institution in a conference like this. It was a German speaking to Germans, this time about England. It was Karl Marx, expressing himself in one of the great languages of the Mediterranean. De te fabula narrator. This story is about you. I think the story of globalism, nationalism, its relationship to literary and other cultural traditions is a story about all of us. And in that sense, this conference is about all of us. Now, as I say, my faculties in this respect are very limited. So what I want to do is to talk briefly about some of the general terms of the conference: globalism, nationalism, multiculturalism. And I want to start with the terms of this panel: globalism and nationalism. Now, in current conditions, these terms come so readily as descriptions of our cultural contentions and our cultural prospects that it's tempting to assume that they're somehow natural. These are the self-evident terms in which we should discuss our cultural situation, our cultural prospects. I want to pick at these terms just a little by way of opening the discussion. First, to say that globalism and nationalism are not self-evidently, logically paired contraries at all. If I think about globalism in a spirit of purposeful simple-mindedness, then I think the opposite of the global is quite simply the local. It is what is not the global. And as soon as I think of the local, I'm reminded that the national and nationalism is only one way, although an historically very powerful way, of formulating the meaning, the relationships, and the interests of the global. If, on the other hand, I think of the national, I think of nationalism. I think the historical contrary of nationalism is not this thing called globalism, it is internationalism. Internationalism and a movement of social emancipation, which indeed has been, for most of this century, the strongest, most effective force resisting what we euphemistically call globalization, and which I more readily understand as capitalism in the current stage of its international development and restructuring. However, the global, the national, these are the terms we are given, so let's look at them a little. Think of the supposititious process called globalization and ask what it might mean in its different aspects. First, and least contentiously, it's an economic process. As I say, it's a process in which existing developed capitalisms are reorganizing themselves on a world scale. It describes a condition in which, for the first time in human history, capitalism is active in every corner of the planet. This is truly an unprecedented state of affairs. And in these respects, it makes sense to talk about an achieved and continuing process of globalization. But it's worth noting, and it's not abstract to say so, first of all, that this economic reorganization is not promoting a sort of commodified version of the universal republic, anything but. Globalization is today the foremost sponsor of nationalism. And not only the nationalisms of small resisting peoples, but also the nationalisms of the large powers, the official nationalisms of the large powers. It's also promoting a kind of particularism which is relevant to us at a weekend when the Luxembourg Summit is happening. It's the reorganization of the world, not into little nations or into a unified planet, but into very powerful regional blocs. And the regional, as an economic unit, and not only an economic unit, is something that we need to address, and which the easy appeal to so-called globalization simply effaces. If we turn to politics, the sense of globalization is less easy to discern, because there is no equivalent political process to the economic process in trade. There is no real sense, no real prospect that territorial sovereignty is weakening as the paradigm of political organization throughout the world. And contrary to what the so-called Eurosceptics, the nationalist resistance to European federation in this country would have us say, things like the European Union do not represent a derogation of national sovereignty, of territorial sovereignty, but simply a very measured agreement to share it in several aspects. So we may ask whether there is anything coordinate with economic globalization going on at the political level. Turn then to culture, and specifically to language. Because language, or rather linguistic experience, is the stuff that literatures are made out of. Now, if you look at language in the world, some rather strange correlations appear. I did a little bit of homework for the occasion, and I've discovered several things. First of all, so far as anyone can estimate, there are 4,000 living languages on the planet. 4,000 living languages, but only about 200 nation states. That's a pretty strange ratio. It means nationalists of all kinds take note that it is hard to find a significant and abiding correlation between linguistic communities and political communities, actual or prospective. However, of these 4,000 languages, only something like 160 have a speech community of more than 1 million. But once we move into this 160, we come to the language which is the vehicular language of this conference, English. English has a mother tongue population of about 350 million. The same number again speak it as a second language. A further 1 million is estimated speak it very fluently. A further projection has it that if only 10% of those now learning English in China become reasonably fluent, then the fluent English population of the world will double. That is an extraordinary preeminence for any one language to have on a planet with 4,000 languages and 200 states. English is the second largest mother tongue population in the world and the largest official language community in the world already. Now, what, speaking in broad terms, could anyone make of this? One kind of answer, the happier kind of answer, is that this will represent a quite unprogrammed diversification of English. This is not in any simple sense the spread of a language from 2 or 3 centres to consume ever larger chunks of human experience in what were originally other language zones. There are historical precedents for this. We have to think back several hundred years ago. English was a relatively large language community, mostly concentrated on one little island. And English literature was the thing that got produced between Carlisle and Cornwall. But over a very small number of centuries, and centuries are small units in these calculations, the language has been, as it were, appropriated by colonised peoples. Ireland, my own country, is probably the earliest. Subsequently America, subsequently other countries. And at every point, there was an anxiety about the expropriation of the native soul, and sometimes with cause. But what was also happening at every point was the appropriation by other peoples of these linguistic materials, both for their own purposes and with the effect of lasting changes in the language that they received or had imposed upon them. There is no reason to believe, as English spreads into other linguistic zones, that this process will not repeat itself. Because, as the case of Ireland shows, the case of Ireland above all others, power and independence are not inevitably the prerequisites for this kind of linguistic expropriation and change. Now, that's the good news, nationalists will say. The bad news, and the real news, is that this represents a destructive, spiritually devastating homogenization of culture internationally. And that it really does represent the expropriation of souls, the expropriation of spirituality, the extinction of whole cultures, whole traditions. That is the familiar nationalist account. It is worth saying, by the way, that it has been a familiar account among the expropriated English throughout this century, where one after another wave of Americanization has been denounced and resisted as the end of the English soul. So this really is a story about us, as well as about other peoples. But the nationalist account is that this linguistic dominance is destructive. That, in the words of an Irish cultural commentator recently, what it represents, what it threatens, is ethnocide. The death of ethnos, or the death, inevitably, of all but one strange ethnos known as the Anglo-American cultural complex. No doubt nationalists of other zones have their equivalents of this bogey. Now, I want to come to ethnocide, which seems to me an extraordinarily self-contradictory term. Because on the one hand, it posits an overwhelming historical force. And on the other hand, it posits a reality which in some sense should not be touched by history at all. That's the only sense I can make of ethnocide. It is as if to say, there is history for everyone and everything, but not for us. That essentialist definition of the ethnic has been typical of most nationalism. Not all nationalism, but most nationalism. Nationalism, you could say, is the political organization of social relations under the heading of ethnicity. Now, there's a temptation, a cosmopolitan temptation, when one's confronted with this understanding of ethnicity, and that is to say, forward to the universal republic, forward to the cosmopolitanism of the peoples. I feel that the pull of this as strongly as anyone coming from an island on the other side of Europe, Ireland, where identitarian dogmas have wrought great destruction. But it seems to me that it might be more interesting, might be more fruitful if we try to argue inside the concept of the ethnic. And what I have in mind here is an alternative understanding of ethnicity put forward by Stuart Hall, cultural critic, a Jamaican cultural critic based in England. And Hall's definition of ethnicity is pointedly, programmatically, the opposite of the sort of ethnic purism that we're all familiar with from nationalist movements and from cultural nationalism. Hall thinks of ethnicity, he severs it from all questions of both biological and cultural fatalism. It is not what you receive as your genetic code. Ethnicity, as he describes it, is quite simply the difference that your contingent resources of language, kinship, communal experience make to the social, the sexual relations that constitute your life, constitute your subjectivity. Ethnicity defined in this way is vague, and Hall would say that is precisely the point. What Hall is trying to do is to redeem the proper historical vagueness and contingency of the realities, the identifications that we have come to call ethnic. Ethnicity, as Hall understands it, is a radically historical dimension of culture, of subjectivity. Ethnicity, as Hall defines it, can do something that would be a horror to any ethnic purist. Ethnicity can generate new ethnicities. The case he's thinking about, a particularly relevant one, is the emergence of a genuinely new ethnicity in this country in the last 50 years, the Black English. Not simply the Black British, but the Black English. A kind of Englishness that has never existed before, that was not programmed. It is a genuinely historical emergence with uncertain prospects. Now, ethnicity, this understanding of ethnicity, to what is it an alternative? It is only an alternative to another definition of ethnicity, the purist one, the essentialist one. This is not, as I understand it, another bid to background class relations, gender relations, forms of sexuality. It is the difference that inflects them. And the national and the nationalist is only one way of trying to capture and control and limit those differences. There's an objection to it, and it's an objection I feel myself. This is beginning to sound like a kind of post-colonial utopianism, something that abstracts the relations of power, politically and economically defined. There is that temptation in it. It is a kind of utopianism. But I'd say this, there are two kinds of utopianism as I understand it. The bad kind is the wishful thinking kind. The kind that says, it should be thus, therefore I am determined to believe that it already is thus. And that leads us genuinely to a very naive, self-satisfied kind of cosmopolitanism, which truly can exist only, normally, for small groups of intellectuals of a highly mobile kind. The less bad kind of utopianism, the better kind of utopianism, is one that quite simply insists, however unilaterally, on historical possibility. It doesn't claim to be a realistic calculation politically, but it does insist on the historical possibility. And that is the spirit in which I would like to commend Stuart Hall's kind of argument to you. Finally, I want to say a word about multiculturalism. Multiculturalism, again, is a term that is probably too familiar for comfort. and in any setting where it's active, there is usually a dominant definition. I prefer to think of multiculturalism as a highly contentious, divided, and unresolved field. And when I say this, I'm thinking of the criticisms that have been made by anti-racists and others of multiculturalism as it has taken shape in this country. One of the charges that is made against multiculturalism is that it is precisely a bad utopia, where issues of recognition and respect become a kind of piety, and there is no hard recognition or attempt to deal with the real inequalities of those cultures that make up the multi. The second criticism, which I think is perhaps more germane, is this, that multiculturalism often involves a kind of ethnic pickling. Multiculturalism is the doctrine that all our various essences shall cohabit peacefully and unchangeably together. Culture, in this tendentious definition of multiculturalism, is an exaltation of ethnic purism. What it in fact involves, I speak here, this is an observation from a parent with a child in the London school system. What is meant by culture is firstly what doesn't change. Second, what is most traditional. Third, what is dominant, or supposedly dominant in the culture in question. And fourth, the bottom line is it's usually religion. With all respect to religions of all kinds, I don't think that they are the essences of cultures. A friend of mine had an experience in a London secondary school where his white English daughter was being taught, and it was a very admirable school with a strong multicultural commitment. At a certain point in the year, the English kids were introduced to South Asian culture, Indian culture, through some experience of the Feast of Diwali, which is entirely a good thing. But my friend, who is a mischief maker by nature, said, well, this is all very well, but Indian culture includes a great deal more than Diwali. I mean, what about Bengal communism? Of course, this question was not designed to produce an answer. It was designed to make a point about culture as multiculturalism in some settings is prone to understand it. The sense of culture, the sense of ethnicity that Hall recommends is of an entirely different kind. It is contingent, it can be described at a given point, it can be argued within at a given point, but it has no necessary future. If it were to have, if ethnic purism were to dominate all understanding of the ethnic, leading it by the hand into nationalism, then this really would be the pickling of prospects. And this really would be the joint triumph of nationalism, but also of globalism. Because when globalism is not generating nationalist passion, it is marketing national cultures, the commodity traffic in national essences, of which tourism is the principal peaceful form. So then, I really want to end on that, floating this this alternative understanding of ethnicity and this rather skeptical understanding of multiculturalism in the name of what actually is, for all of us, I think, our greatest historical resource. Not the necessities of progress, which have failed us too many times. Certainly not the necessities of the nation or ethnic purity, but rather, quite simply, uncertainty. Thank you. Now, having already spoken far too long, I simply want to introduce our first speaker, Stathis Gourgouris, whose topic is The Ark's Void, 2000 AD, a communist poet, retrospectively.